For almost 80 years, Elisabeth Kalhammer kept a secret. In 1943, as a teenager, she answered a simple job ad for a maid. She had no idea it would place her inside Adolf Hitler's private mountain home, the Berghof, high in the Bavarian Alps. It looked like a peaceful retreat, but inside, fear ruled the halls. From the start, she was warned. Say nothing. Ask nothing, or you'll disappear. So she stayed quiet. She served tea, cleaned rooms, and passed by walls covered in stolen paintings. While just feet away, some of the darkest decisions in history were being made. She never looked Hitler in the eye, but she could feel him enter a room before he even spoke. He was soft-spoken, yet terrifying. The whole place was quiet, but heavy with something unspeakable. Now, after a lifetime of silence, the world finally hears her voice. Elisabeth Kalhammer, the maid who served in Hitler's mountain retreat. In 1943, Elisabeth Kalhammer was 22 years old when she stepped into what she thought was just another housekeeping job. She had answered an ad for a domestic servant, nothing unusual. Born in 1923 in Salzburg, Austria, her family wasn't political. They were ordinary people trying to survive in extraordinary times. So when she boarded a bus bound for the mountains of Bavaria, she didn't know she was being delivered into the very heart of Nazi power. The destination was the Berghof, Adolf Hitler's private retreat near Berchtesgaden. It wasn't until she arrived and was processed through the strict gates that she learned the truth. This was Hitler's home. The moment she walked inside, Calhhammer felt it. The walls were silent. Everything ran on quiet rules, spoken and unspoken. The staff operated under a strict hierarchy. No one asked questions. No one volunteered opinions. And most importantly, no one was allowed to speak first in the presence of Hitler. Her duties weren't glamorous. She worked in logistics as a typist and helped with basic office tasks. She had little direct contact with Hitler, but his presence shaped every moment of her day. He was oddly polite, soft-spoken, and precise about everything. She recalled how he never raised his voice and dressed immaculately. He followed a strict vegetarian diet, drank no alcohol, and maintained a strange kind of order in the middle of global chaos. Eva Braun was often present too, but Calhhammer noted that she didn't hold real authority over the household. Eva seemed to float above the work, focused more on her appearance than the structure of life inside the house. To the staff, she was distant and untouchable, rarely speaking, never giving instructions. Everyone followed the rules without needing reminders. The Berghof ran on silence, repetition, and fear. Mistakes weren't corrected, they just weren't made. People vanished without explanation. A maid might be scrubbing floors one day and be gone the next. The message was always clear: keep quiet, or you might disappear too. By 1944, the mood inside the Berghof began to shift. The war was turning. Hitler became more tense. The quiet routines were disrupted by a steady flow of military officers and emergency meetings. The once rigid structure of the household began to fray. In 1945, as Allied forces advanced and bombing raids crept closer, Calhhammer was ordered to return to Salzburg. She never saw the Berghof again. Not long after, it was destroyed by bombs. For decades, she told no one about what she'd seen. It wasn't until she was in her 80s that she began to speak, slowly, carefully, through memoirs and interviews. She died in 2023 at the age of 96. Trudel Junga, the young secretary who typed Hitler's last words. Trudel Junga was just 22 years old when she found herself sitting at a typewriter in one of the most dangerous places on Earth, the inner circle of Adolf Hitler. Born in 1920 in Munich, she had once dreamed of becoming a ballerina. But war changed many dreams. In 1942, she took a secretarial job, thinking it was a normal government post. She passed a typing test and was soon summoned to serve in Hitler's personal staff. She didn't realize what that really meant until she arrived. There were no uniforms, no shouting soldiers, just paperwork, endless typing, and strict rules. Hitler was often polite to his secretaries, even going so far as to arrange her marriage to a young SS officer named Hans Junga, who would later die on the Eastern Front. Her job involved more than typing. She sat through long dinners, listened during planning meetings, and typed Hitler's letters, speeches, and official declarations. To her, he often appeared calm and even charming, especially around women. He joked, asked about her day, and sometimes spoke about art or dogs, but there was a coldness behind his eyes. She began to notice it more often as the war dragged on. After the failed assassination attempt on July 20, 1944, when Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg tried to kill Hitler with a bomb hidden in a briefcase, Junga recalled Hitler's odd reaction. Instead of fear, he was filled with a strange kind of joy. He believed it was proof that fate still protected him. By early 1945, Junga was living in the Führerbunker beneath the crumbling streets of Berlin. It felt like a strange dream. Outside, artillery shook the city. Inside, Hitler still spoke of victory. On April 22nd, he finally admitted what everyone already knew. The war was lost. Junga, along with others, promised to stay until the end. Days later, on April 29th, Hitler summoned her to type his last will and political statement. She worked through the night, her fingers moving across the keys, while Hitler dictated the final words of a collapsing regime. There was no regret in his voice, no sorrow, just determination and delusion. She was deeply shaken. On April 30th, 1945, she heard the gunshot that ended his life. She had seen Eva Braun just hours earlier, smiling faintly in a wedding dress. When it was over, the bunker fell into silence. Junga stayed one more day, then fled the city disguised as a civilian. Captured by the Soviets, then handed over to the British, she became one of the most important witnesses to Hitler's final moments. She was denazified in 1947, but the guilt never left. She once said, "I was young, and I didn't know, but that is no excuse." Roous Meech, the bodyguard who heard the final gunshot. Roous Meech was not a soldier in the usual sense. He didn't carry battlefield maps or bark orders across a front line. His job was to stand watch, carry phones, and never speak unless spoken to. Born in 1917 in a town now part of Poland, he joined the SS in 1937 at age 20. After recovering from a war wound in Poland, he was reassigned to a different kind of battlefield, one filled with silence, paranoia, and polished boots. He became part of Hitler's close protection unit, a job that meant riding in the second car behind the Führers, managing secure lines between generals, and listening to conversations that shaped the war, even if he had no say in them. Meech's world shrank over time, from Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia to his mountaintop home in Bavaria, and finally to a dim concrete bunker beneath Berlin. There, as the Third Reich collapsed around him, Meech answered phones, dodged rumors, and pretended everything was still in control. On April 30th, 1945, the control snapped. He heard someone shout for Heinz Linga, then a gunshot. Meech was on the phone, faking a loud conversation to drown out what had just happened. When he entered Hitler's study, he saw the Führer's body on a table, blood pooling under his head. Eva Braun lay on the couch, her lips blue. Her dress, dark blue with white ruffles, stayed burned in his memory. He refused to look too closely or linger too long. He didn't watch the cremation. Too dangerous, he later said. Too many witnesses didn't live long. He stayed inside, then watched the bunker unravel further. On May 1st, Magda Goebbels killed her 6 children. Meech said he saw them being led away by Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger, who gave them something sweet to drink. The next day, May 2nd, as Soviet soldiers pushed into Berlin, Meech was captured at his post, still answering phones. The Soviets didn't believe his story. They kept him for 9 years, questioning him about Hitler's final moments. Meech always told them the same thing. Hitler shot himself, and he saw the body. After being released in 1954, he returned to West Berlin and took up work as a house painter. For decades, he stayed quiet. Then in 2006, he spoke. His book, I Was Hitler's Bodyguard, defended his role. He claimed he didn't know about the Holocaust, that it wasn't discussed, that he was just a man doing his job. Some believed him, others didn't. Meech died in 2010, the last living witness to what happened in the bunker when the gunshot rang out. Heinz Linga, the valet who stood at the end. Heinz Linga knew the routine. For years, he had brought tea to Hitler's bedside, laid out his clothes, and made sure his pencils were sharp and his glasses were polished. But by April 1945, things were far from routine. The walls of the Führerbunker shook with artillery fire. The Soviet Red Army was closing in. Hitler barely slept, barely ate, and trusted almost no one. Linga remained at his side, calm on the surface, but fully aware the end was coming. On April 27th, Hitler quietly told him the plan. He and Eva Braun would take their lives. There would be no escape. He gave Linga instructions: find blankets, get enough gasoline to burn 2 bodies, and be ready. Linga nodded, heart pounding. The next day, Hitler married Eva Braun in a small room inside the bunker. Linga helped with the preparations. The wedding was brief. Afterward, Hitler dictated his final will, naming Admiral Dönitz as his successor and ordering that his corpse not fall into Soviet hands. He insisted his body be burned. Linge heard it all. Then on April 30th, sometime after 3 in the afternoon, Linge entered the study one last time. Hitler gave him a quiet nod. "You know what to do," he said. Minutes later, a gunshot echoed through the bunker. Linge opened the door. Hitler was slumped forward on a floral-patterned couch, blood trailing down his temple. Eva Braun sat beside him, her face frozen in a grimace. Linge didn't linger. With Otto Gunga's help, he wrapped both bodies in wool blankets, carried them up to the garden, and set them ablaze using the gasoline they'd stored days earlier. The smell of fire and fuel clung to his clothes for days. Long before the bunker, Linge had served Hitler in private. He joined the SS in 1933 and became Hitler's valet in 1935. His job wasn't military, but personal, arranging clothes, laying out newspapers, helping Hitler bathe and dress. He was one of the few allowed into Hitler's bedroom without knocking. He saw everything: Hitler's trembling hands, the way he clung to old victories, and his growing mistrust of even his closest officers. Linge noticed how Hitler's health declined after 1942. First the shakes, then the shuffling walk, then the moments of staring at nothing for too long. In January 1945, Linga followed Hitler into the bunker. He stayed through the final days, watched Eva Braun smile at staff even as the walls shook, and marked the day Hitler turned 56 without a single cheer. On May 2nd, Linga tried to escape Berlin. Soviet soldiers caught him. He spent the next 10 years in Soviet prisons, refusing to change his account. After a decade in Soviet captivity, Linga returned to West Germany in 1955. He lived quietly, later publishing memoirs that detailed Hitler's private life. On March 9, 1980, Heinz Linga died in Hamburg at age 66, never renouncing his loyalty. Otto Gunga was just 19 when he joined the Waffen-SS in 1936. Born in Jena, Thuringia, he had grown up in a strongly nationalist family. His strict discipline, academic record, and quiet obedience pushed him up the ranks quickly. By 1940, he had caught the attention of Hitler's inner circle. In 1943, he was chosen as persönlicher Adjutant, Hitler's personal adjutant. It was more than just a job. He became one of the few men trusted to handle Hitler's most private routines. From organizing travel schedules to managing bunker security, Gunga was expected to anticipate Hitler's needs before they were spoken. Every movement, every phone call, every train ride, he made sure it happened with precision. Gunga had front-row access to major events. In July 1944, he was at the Wolf's lair when Klaus von Stauffenberg's bomb exploded in a failed attempt to kill Hitler. Gunga was injured in the blast, but remained on duty. By April 1945, as the Red Army encircled Berlin, Gunga was stationed in the Führerbunker. There, he witnessed the final unraveling of the Nazi regime. He helped arrange Hitler's hurried wedding to Eva Braun. He stood by as the dictator dictated his last political testament. And when the end came, Hitler gave Gunga one last command: make sure his body was never found. On April 30th, 1945, shortly after 3 p.m., Gunga stood near the study door when the gunshot rang out. He and Heinz Linga entered the room. Hitler sat slumped, blood pooling under his head. Eva lay on the sofa, her lips blue from cyanide. Gunga acted fast. With Linga and driver Erich Kempka, he wrapped the bodies in wool blankets and carried them up to the garden outside the chancellery. They doused them in gasoline. Gunga struck the match. He stood guard as the bodies burned. He later said he had no choice. Hitler's last order was clear: no body, no public spectacle. Not like Mussolini. On May 2, 45, Gunga was captured by Soviet troops. For the next 12 years, he was interrogated again and again. The Soviets wanted proof. They didn't believe Hitler was dead. But Gunga gave the same answers. Gunshot to the right temple. Cyanide for Eva. Burned in the garden. No body left. Just ashes and bloodstains. By 956, he was finally released from Soviet custody. He returned to West Germany, kept a low profile, and refused most interviews. In the 1980s, he shared limited information with German historian Joachim Fest. He never recanted. He never claimed regret. He died on October 2, 2003, at age 86. His final role in history remains fixed. He was the man who made sure Hitler's corpse vanished. Johanna Wolf, the quiet typist at the heart of the regime. Johanna Wolf didn't carry a weapon or wear a uniform. She didn't give speeches or sign orders. But from 1933 to 1945, she sat closer to Adolf Hitler than most of his generals. Every day, she listened to his words, typed his thoughts, and kept her opinions locked away. Born on June 1, 1900 in Munich, Johanna was the daughter of a civil servant. She had a middle-class upbringing, quiet and respectable. What set her apart was her exceptional shorthand and typing ability, skills not common among women at the time. Those skills became her ticket into the heart of a rising dictatorship. She began her political career in 1929 as secretary to Gregor Strasser, a powerful early Nazi figure. When Strasser fell out of favor, Rudolf Hess brought her into Hitler's private office. From then on, she remained in Hitler's inner circle, rarely speaking, always typing. She became the top secretary in the Kanzlei des Führers, Hitler's personal chancery, outshining others like Christa Schroeder and Gera Christian. Wherever Hitler went, she followed. The Berghof in the Bavarian Alps, the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, and finally the concrete tomb of the Führerbunker in Berlin. She never married, had no children. Her entire life became one of silent service. Hitler called her Fräulein Wolf. She called him the boss. Each day he would pace or sit, dictating letters, speeches, and commands. She took them down in shorthand, then typed them with precision on her Olympia typewriter. Hitler hated mistakes, but he never raised his voice to her. She was allowed to correct things, something few others dared. Wolf said Hitler was always calm, methodical, never yelled, never slammed a fist. He liked dogs and quiet walks. He spoke often of nature, but never of killing. According to her, he kept his crimes far away from his desk. When asked about the Holocaust after the war, she said she never heard a word of it inside the Führer's office. She claimed they lived in a bubble, cut off from the outside world. Historians have questioned that story, but Wolf never changed it. In April 1945, she was one of the last women left in the bunker. On April 22nd, she said goodbye to Hitler for the final time. "Thank you for everything," he told her. Then she left. On May 23rd, she was caught by Allied troops, disguised as a nurse. She was held at Ludwigsburg camp for over a year, questioned again and again. She told them Hitler had been polite, distant, careful, but never cruel in front of her. After her release, she vanished from public life, living quietly in Munich until her death on June 5th in 1985. Erich Kempka, the chauffeur who burned Hitler. Erich Kempka didn't sit in meetings or deliver speeches. His place wasn't behind a desk, it was behind the wheel. But on April 30th, 1945, his role changed forever. That day, he was handed 2 corpses, 2 cans of gasoline, and an order. Make sure Adolf Hitler's body would never be found. Kempka had been Hitler's personal chauffeur for more than a decade. He knew the man's habits, his routines, and his timing down to the minute. But nothing prepared him for what he was asked to do in the final hours of the Third Reich. He was born on September 16, 1910, in Oberhausen, a small city in Prussia. He was the 9th of 10 children in a working-class family. His father died in a mining accident when Erich was just 7. He trained as a mechanic and became a driver, practical, efficient, and quiet. He joined the Nazi Party in 1930 and, by 1934, replaced Julius Schreck as Hitler's full-time chauffeur. From then on, he was always nearby, though never close enough to speak freely. He drove the armored Mercedes-Benz, managed the entire fleet, mapped safe routes, and made sure Hitler got where he needed to be without delay. Hitler demanded punctuality and order. Kempka delivered it. By April 1945, the world was collapsing around them. The Soviets had surrounded Berlin. Inside the Führerbunker, Hitler was preparing for death. Days earlier, Kempka had received an unusual order: bring in 200 liters of gasoline and store it near the Reich Chancellery. He didn't ask why. On April 30th, Otto Gunga called for him. Hitler and Eva Braun were dead. Kempka helped wrap their bodies in blankets, carried them up the narrow concrete stairs, and placed them in a shallow crater near the bunker's emergency exit. They poured the gasoline several times. Nearby shelling made it difficult to keep the flames going. The fire was hot but inconsistent. Kempka couldn't bear to look at their faces. The smell stayed with him for life. It was a mixture of human flesh, gasoline, and burning concrete, he said. It's something you never forget. He fled Berlin the next day with Martin Bormann and Dr. Stumpfegger, trying to escape the Soviet advance. He was captured by American forces on June 20, 1945, in Berchtesgaden. During interrogation, Kempka gave detailed testimony that confirmed what many suspected. Hitler was dead, and his body had been burned beyond recognition. His statements were considered reliable and helped Hugh Trevor Roper piece together the final days in the bunker. Kempka was never charged with war crimes and was released in 1947. He published his memoir, I Burned Adolf Hitler, in 1951. He never expressed guilt. In a 1955 interview, he said, "I drove. I didn't govern. I did my job." He died on January 24, 1975, in Freiburg. Hans Bauer, the Hitler's pilot who couldn't fly him out. Hans Bauer was a man of the sky, but when it mattered most, the skies were closed. He had spent years flying Adolf Hitler across Europe, logging over 1,000 flight hours together. They flew to the Berghof in Bavaria, the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, and battlefronts on the Eastern Front. Hitler trusted Bauer more than most generals. He was one of the few men allowed to speak freely in his presence. But in the bunker, there were no more runways, no planes, no orders to fly, just cement walls, stale air, and the sound of shells above. Bauer was born on June 19, 1897, in Ampfing, Bavaria. He fought as a gunner and then a pilot in World War I. Shot down and wounded, he returned to the air during peacetime, becoming one of Germany's top civilian pilots. By 1932, he was flying campaign trips for Hitler during the election season. Hitler liked him immediately. He was calm, efficient, and silent when needed. When Hitler became Chancellor in 1933, Bauer was appointed his official pilot and later commander of the Führer's personal flight squadron. During the war, Bauer flew Hitler to state visits and troop inspections. He piloted a modified Focke-Wulf Condor and managed travel down to the last detail. No one got closer in the air or on the tarmac. He wasn't a political man. He followed orders, flew routes, and did his job. That's how he saw it. In April 1945, with Soviet forces pushing into Berlin, Bauer rushed to the Chancellery one last time. He brought a small aircraft, a Fieseler Storch, and begged Hitler to flee. But Hitler refused. "The fate of the Reich is sealed here," he said. "Thank you, Hans. You've been a faithful comrade." Hitler chose the bunker. Bauer stayed until the end. He helped destroy documents, tried to protect staff, and was wounded during a failed escape attempt after Hitler's suicide on April 30th. The Soviets captured him in early May. They interrogated him for years, especially about Hitler's death. Bauer never changed his story. "I saw the body. I know what happened. There was no escape." He lost a leg from his wounds and spent a decade in Soviet prison camps before being released in 1955. Back in West Germany, Bauer wrote his memoirs, I Flew with the Mighty, published in 1956. He never expressed regret. "He was my commander," he said. "I don't regret being his pilot." He lived quietly and died on February 17, 1993, at the age of 95. The pilot who flew Hitler for over a decade had no final flight left to offer. Gera Christian, the secretary who returned to the bunker. Gera Christian sat behind a typewriter while the world collapsed around her. Born on December 13, 1913, in Berlin as Gerda Daranowski, she trained as a multilingual secretary, fluent in English, French, and German. In 1937, through a recommendation by Martin Bormann, she joined Hitler's personal secretarial staff. She didn't just take dictation, she became part of the machinery. Her job was simple: be fast, precise, and invisible. And she was all three. She typed speeches, commands, military directives, words that would shape the fate of millions. She was often on call late into the night, rotating shifts with secretaries like Johanna Wolf and Christa Schroeder. Hitler didn't like to dictate sitting down. He would pace the floor, stroke his dog Blondie, and stare out the window while mumbling lines. She wrote everything he said, no questions asked. She had a calm presence and striking looks. Some around her thought she was too beautiful for a secretary. In 1943, she married Luftwaffe General Gera Christian and took a short leave. Most assumed she wouldn't return, but she did. In late 1944, with Germany crumbling, she voluntarily came back. Not because she believed in victory, but because, as she said years later, it was my place. In April 1945, she moved into the Führerbunker. She typed Hitler's final orders. She saw his hands shake, his eyes lose focus, and his voice weaken. She watched as he talked about counterattacks that would never come, and held staff dinners that felt more like funerals. On April 28th, she attended Hitler's midnight wedding to Eva Braun. The ceremony was short. Hitler signed a few papers, kissed his new wife, and the two stood silently. Gerda described the moment as having a radiance for just a second. Then the weight returned. On April 29th, she helped type Hitler's last political testament. His tone was cold, procedural. He spoke of justice, not defeat. On April 30th, Hitler retreated to his private room. Hours later, there was a gunshot. The bunker went silent. Gerda helped clean up what remained of the office. On May 1st, she joined a group of staff attempting to flee the ruins of Berlin, disguised as a medical worker. She was captured and interrogated by Soviet forces. Despite her high-ranking connections, she claimed to know nothing of the Holocaust. "I never saw a camp," she said. The Soviets didn't believe her. After being released, she divorced her husband in 1946 and settled quietly in Dusseldorf. She never gave interviews. Only once, in a letter during the 1950s, did she write, "I'm ashamed of not having asked more questions." She died on April 14th, 1997. Gerda's story, like so many from that bunker, sits in the quiet space between guilt and denial. None of them pulled the trigger. None commanded armies. They typed, they fetched coats, they handed over gasoline cans, they swept the floor. But they saw, they heard. They stood just close enough to understand that something monstrous was happening, and just far enough to claim they didn't know. Almost all of them survived, and when they spoke, decades later, their words were measured. Precise. Sanitized. A handful showed flickers of regret. Most leaned on duty, on habit, on helplessness. The last days of the Third Reich weren't just the fall of a dictator. They were the final act of a performance, staged loyalty, rehearsed silence, and dying myths. The people in that bunker carried out Hitler's end, not with protest, but with routine. And in doing so, they showed the world how horror doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it types, sometimes it salutes and walks away.